Hello and welcome to The Food Chain from the BBC World Service. I'm Ruth Alexander. Today, what is the best hangover cure? We are going to find out. Are any of these people we spoke to at a German market hall in Berlin onto the right idea?
Hi, my name is Nicola, and for hangover food, I love poached eggs with this creamy sauce on the side. And I learned recently, if you're really hangover and you can't even get up because you're so dizzy, you need to have a black Turkish tea with a lot of sugar, so you have the blood sugar to get over the hangover. So that's what I would have. And flowers, because they make you happy.
My name is Alina Reimi, and when I'm hangover, I usually crave for sushi, which is like very unusual hangover food.
Hi, my name is Jess, and when I'm hungover, I really love a good coffee, and I think pizza is really good.
Hello, my name is Penny. When I'm hangover, I tend to like food that are not too with like super strong taste, something soupy or comforting and soft. So perhaps like one of the stuff we have here, which is House homemade Asokan tofu with a really nice soft texture and very nutritious, and then it could be something that's good for hangover. So this is my hangover best choice.
Well, to unpack the science, the myths and the cultural habits behind the hangover, I'm joined by three guests. Andrew Scholey, Professor of Human Psychopharmacology at Northumbria University in the UK and member of the Alcohol Hangover Research Group. Andrew, what do you eat the day after the night before?
Well, I tend not to have those night befores too much these days, but in my youth, I think probably like a lot of people, it would have been a couple of painkillers, a large glass of water and maybe a greasy spoon. But knowing what I know now, I'm not sure that would be the best thing to have.
Also joining us is Marisa Moll, a registered nutritionist with a focus on the gut microbiome and the gut-brain axis. And you're in Paraguay. Marisa, what do you eat after drinking alcohol?
After drinking, I drink green juice with a lot of celery and good fats like avocado and not, for example, that Dr. Andrew told us about for example, this greasy thing. Bacon, no. It has to be good fats.
And also with us is Jonathan Shears, Professor of English Literature at Keele University in the UK and author of The Hangover, A Literary and Cultural History. Jonathan, what's your go-to hangover cure?
Well, I think Andrew was hinting at the fact that prevention is probably better than cure. I tend to agree with that these days. But if I was hungover, what I would tend to go for is kind of the things I'd have anyway in the morning, which would be sort of wholemeal toast, porridge, honey, that kind of thing. So food with low glycemic index, slow release carbs, that kind of thing, because you want to bring yourself back into the day gradually, I think. The fry up maybe in my youth,
Let's start with the basics. Andrew, what is a hangover?
Hangover is defined as the cluster of negative symptoms that occur after a bout of drinking when your blood alcohol levels are at or approaching zero. So it's very different to alcohol intoxication, and obviously the timescale is very different. So you have a peak of impairment that occurs during drinking, which subsides, and then usually there's a period of sleep in between, and then in the morning alcohol is cleared out of the system, but there are these symptoms which are associated with alcohol hangover, which are we know now are not what was once thought, which was this was just residual alcohol, that people still had some alcohol on board and that's what was causing the impairment. We now know that it's a cluster of different physiological processes which cause and contribute to hangover.
So what's going on inside the body then, dare I ask?
Just sort of briefly, what happens is that alcohol is broken down in the body. It's absorbed from the gut into the blood, in the blood, then it distributes throughout all tissue, including the brain, which is where you get the subjective feelings of intoxication. And then it's almost immediately broken down by enzymes which produce acetylaldehyde and acetate, so enzymes like alcohol dehydrogenase. So that's part of the kind of breakdown of any toxin. But because alcohol is a toxin and because these metabolites are toxins, the body mounts what's called an inflammatory response. So this involves the release of inflammatory markers like cytokines, interleukin-6, C-reactive proteins are the names, it doesn't really matter. They're the same things that happen when we get an infection.
That's the body basically trying to solve this harm.
Yes, the sort of first line of defence against many types of toxins. And we know that these circulate, that many of them affect brain function directly or indirectly through what's called the cerebral vasculature, the blood flow to the brain. And these all contribute to the symptomatology that we call hangover. And then the other side of it is that there is quite profound functional impairment. And a good way of thinking about this is that if you put people on a driving simulator and give them alcohol, so they're at the drink driving limit, so in many countries in the world that's 0.05 or 0.08, that the impairment that they demonstrate while driving on these simulators is equivalent to if they're at the drink driving limit of 0.08, say. And yet if somebody saw somebody who was hungover, kind of driving a bit erratically, and they were pulled over by the police, they would blow 0 on a blood alcohol test.
Wow, so you could be driving like a drunk driver when you're hungover, effectively, but no one would be able to detect a problem in your blood at that point.
That's right. There isn't a biomarker specific for hangover at the moment.
Wow, and are different people affected differently? Are some people's hangovers worse?
Yes. So there are individual differences. Particularly, there are some genetic differences. Well, at the kind of functional level, some people report that they are resistant to hangover, and there is a certain degree of truth to that. Quite often we find that when we look at this in surveys and measure what people drink, the people who claim to be alcohol immune or alcohol resistant actually tend to drink a bit less or drink over a slower period of time. There are also individual differences in the genetics of the some of the enzymes which break down alcohol, and people who break down alcohol more quickly, maybe because of differences in the makeup, slight differences in their alcohol dehydrogenase enzyme, tend to have less severe hangovers. So there's a real physiological individual difference there, and some of the so-called alcohol treatments and cures try to do something similar, and there may be ways of doing that using foods, but maybe that's something else that we'll come on to.
Jonathan, why do you think the hangover makes such a good subject for writers?
I think, if we agree that a hangover is something that makes us feel bad, what do we actually mean by feeling bad? The hangover also includes a whole sort of a range of emotional responses as well, which might be embarrassment or shame or guilt. If you look at writers like, say, Robert Burns, for example, who writes some great hangover letters, we associate him with writing as a heavy drinker, but he writes about the miserable blank in his heart, for example, the morning after.
Doesn't that sum it up?
Yeah, there's the non-fiction writer Olivia Lang writes about the hangover, says that it creates, in some people, a deep sense of breakage as well. Which I love that expression. There's a particular line by Lord Byron where he says, "Let there be wine and women, mirth and laughter, sermons and soda water the day after."
Jonathan, what are some of your favourite hangover cures that you've read in novels and poems and so on?
I like the kind of chaotic ones. hangover cure. There's in Bridget Jones's diary. So obviously Bridget Jones is a 1990s ladette. She at one point has a hangover, and she has these very, very sort of visceral hangovers where she's beating herself up. So there's a lot of self-flagellation going on. But she has this kind of hangover buffet at one point, where she's eating chocolate eclairs, but also tins of these awful Savoloys, these sort of tins of hot dog sausages, those sorts of things as well. And it's but partly with her, of course, it's this idea of comfort eating, but then you have the sort of the kill or cure kind of remedy as well. So, for example, something like the Prairie Oyster cocktail, which was a bit the sort of the golden age of the cocktails in the 1920s and 1930s, where you've got brandy, but then that's the classic one that people think of as the sort of the hangover cure nauseous, where you have a whole egg yolk in it and you down it in one, that kind of thing.
Marisa, do you think any of these cures, chocolate eclairs, that's like a chocolate cream patisserie, hot dog sausages, or even indeed hair of the dogs and brandy with raw egg, do you think any of those could work?
I don't think it will work. The thing is that if you are preparing for a hangover, and I was listening really very very close to what Jonathan and Andrew said, because the impact that inflammation of the microbiome will be it depends what you eat before and after the hangover.
So it's all lessening your hangover, that's all in the preparation, is it? So it's what you eat before you drink?
Before you drink. And it depends on the individuality of the microbiome again, because that gut-brain axis will work different, and there will be some persons that are individuals that will be really very happy because they have serotonin in their gut, and they have serotonin in the brain too, and there are some individuals that will not.
So what should you eat then to prepare your gut lining and your microbiome?
Prepare where you can be high protein. You can eat chicken. You can eat, I was saying, good. It's the same about after too. You can eat, drink a lot of water between you. If you are drinking a glass of wine, and then you for example, you drink the glass of wine, and you drink a glass of water, and that will dilute the acetaldehyde that it was talking about Andrew minutes ago. You can drink water. You can eat high protein like chicken soup or chicken, eggs, okay? Animal high protein, avocado, olive oil. And you can do, for example, we use a lot here in Paraguay and in Uruguay. You make like a mix of the avocado and you put olive oil, and you can eat it like a sauce.
Andrew, how important is it to drink water after you've been drinking an excess of alcohol?
What studies have shown, even though many people swear by the idea of just drinking water to reduce hangover symptoms, is they don't seem to reduce hangover per se. So if you give somebody a single line and say, how bad is your hangover, from extremely bad to no hangover at all, it doesn't really shift that dial at all for the overall symptoms. But of course it does address one of the individual symptoms, which is dehydration and thirst. And staying hydrated, again, is just something which is important for health in general.
It seems like so many people are drawn not to, healthy juices and healthy fats when they're hungover, but spicy, greasy, fatty food full of carbohydrates. Do you know why that is?
I think it's probably just what Jonathan was saying earlier about comfort foods. I don't think there is any efficacy there at all.
Could they actually be doing us harm?
Yes, they certainly could. So we've done a little bit of research, only a tiny study looking at background diet and in people who get hangovers, looking at the components of food which may help to mitigate against hangovers or seem to result in less severe hangovers. And the two components that came out were zinc and niacin, vitamin B3. Nicotinic acid, it's also called. So those would be foods like shellfish, red meat and pork, so proteinaceous foods. And then for vitamin B3, legumes, chickpeas, lentils. But I have to say, this is just background diet. So, and it's a very small sample. I really wouldn't want to try and make too much of it. In terms of the hangover cures or preventative treatments which are marketed, we've done a couple of studies where we've trawled through Amazon and picked, in one of the studies we found 100 of the top hangover cures, and then of those, because of our strict criteria, about I think 87 met the criteria for making a very specific health claim. So they cured hangovers, they prevent a hangover the next morning. Of those 87, when we then did a literature search to see how many had any kind of evidence from human or animal studies that they could prevent hangovers, the sum total was 0 who had any evidence of efficacy at all. So there's a huge kind of it's marketing over evidence, unfortunately, in terms of those kind of hangover cures, which are generally tend to be supplements or electrolytes or vitamin cocktails. But I think there's definitely something in what Marissa was saying about what you eat immediately before, and part of that is I'm sure to do with the microbiome, is something we're only just beginning to understand. But we also know, for example, that if you eat the right kind of meal before you consume alcohol, it can halve the amount of alcohol that gets into the bloodstream, because the enzymes that break down alcohol can act before this gastric emptying, which is where it leaves the gut into the rest of the body. So, and as Marissa was saying, those sort of foods which are particularly heavy in protein and fats, and probably for the sake of health in general, that should be omega-3 fatty acids rather than the other sort of fats are probably, rather than saturated fats, are probably a better idea for health in general. And of course, one thing we haven't talked about is the kind of opposite, which is the ultra-processed foods, which, although I'm sure listeners will be aware, is a slightly controversial term because of the categorization is a little bit messy. But certainly, people know what these kind of unhealthy foods are. I think fast foods in general, which are pro-inflammatory, so they will add to the inflammation that's caused by those bouts of alcohol consumption. So they should be avoided for all sorts of reasons, but for avoiding hangovers is another one to add to that list.
So when you've got inflammation going on in the body, the last thing you want to do is eat something that might create more inflammation.
I was thinking, maybe I can say this. The thing is, why people, when you drink and you have a hangover, and you after the hangover, what is the thing that it's like your compensation circuit started to think you need to eat something that you feel good, and that is ultra processed food. That's why the day after you want to eat bacon or a hamburger or a Coke. Your circuit of recompensation in your mind needs to eat that kind of foods, the ultra processed food or the fast food that was talking about Andrew. So that's why you asked for that, but it's not the best way to stop that hangover.
What I'm thinking is maybe we can achieve a balance then. If you're feeling hungover, you could reach for maybe just some of the greasy, starchy, spicy foods you're fancying, but also have some healthful green juice and some avocado and other healthy foods. That might work.
So for me, it works that way. For me, for my patients.
So you will allow yourself some comfort food?
Yes, but first eat the chicken soup and the juice and the green juice and everything. And then if you want that kind of food, you can eat it. For example, a donut or a hamburger.
In summary, what is the ultimate hangover cure?
The ultimate hangover cure is to not drink alcohol or not drink alcohol to the level which will give you a hangover. And that is the surefire, bulletproof, nailed-on way of avoiding hangovers.
The thing is that the lifestyle is, for me, it's the ultimate and 100% that it will work. Because not only you have to eat well, you have to sleep well, you have to do exercise, and you have to try to distress.
So in a way, a hangover is months in the preparation.
Yes. If you have a really very good high style, really very good, you will not have so much problems when you drink. A hangover will be completely different. There's no a healthy amount of alcohol. Alcohol is not good for your body.
Jonathan, do you think like the healthy hangover or indeed abstinence is going to catch on in literature anytime soon?
I think that's a bit bigger question than I can answer here. No, I wouldn't say that that's a guarantee, no.
Well, I intend to follow the advice not to drink to excess as the ultimate hangover avoidance strategy, and if I fail, I will try fruit and veg and healthy fats and maybe just a hint of the greasy fried stuff. Thanks to all my guests. Professor Andrew Scoley.
Thank you very much. That was very stimulating.
Marisa Mole.
Thank you for the invitation. For me, it's a pleasure to share with the speakers and with you all this information and the Latin American perspectives about hangover.
I'm Professor Jonathan Cheers.
Thanks, it's been lovely talking to you.